Hello and welcome to Cardinal Dash. I'm King Jemison alongside, as always, Stanford starting goalkeeper Katie Meyer. Oh wait, I guess that was just last week, but go check that out. It's still up there. It's still up there on Twitter. Still up there at dashsports.tv. But this week you're back to me and my boy Daniel Martinez Crams, and we got a lot of Stanford sports discussion for you. We're going to go around the farm today. But Daniel, it's great to be back with just you. What a week that was last week, but we got some great stuff to talk about today as well. So first, Stanford women's basketball is on an absolute tear. 11 straight wins and a Pac-12 championship for the first time since 2014. Yana Williams, Haley Jones, and Lexi Hull, all first team All Pac-12. Anna Wilson, co-defensive player of the year. You've heard us shouting her out all season, so don't say you didn't hear it from us. Tara wins Coach of the Year for the 16th time. Ho hum, of course, she's the GOAT. Cameron Brink was on the all-freshman team. Lacey Hull was the 6th player of the year. So the whole Twins had a big awards day, but phew, there's just too much you can say about this team. They are absolutely peaking at the right time, and now they head to Las Vegas looking for a Pac-12 tournament title, which they won a couple years ago as well. And if the NCAA tournament started today, they would be a #1 seed in that too. So Daniel, talk about what's allowing this team to peak at the right time.
It's the whole mentality of everything that's going down in this program. Tara, from day one this season, was saying they need to be flexible. She obviously likes to make jokes. She said every player's middle name is flexible this year, but it's tough that we can't overestimate what this team did. We can't underestimate it. It's just phenomenal. This is the first time Stanford won the regular season title since 2014. There have been some good Stanford teams in the meantime, some better Oregon teams, some better Oregon State teams. And in a year with a pandemic in which Stanford was on the road for 2 months, they were able to come out and win the regular season title, which is just incredible when we're going back and we're saying this team was on the road. This team was in hotels. This team never saw campus. They never saw friends. They never saw anyone. They were living on the road, but they're able to adapt because of their coach, the coach of the year, deservedly so, after everything she was able to put this team through. Not only becoming the winningest coach in Division I women's basketball history, but then to have the team win the Pac-12 title. There were some setbacks along the way. There were those 2 losses to Colorado and then to UCLA back to back. Since then, Stanford's on that 11-0 run that you just spoke about. This team has put everything together. They've incorporated their freshmen. They've relied on their seniors. They've done every single thing you could possibly hope for a team with serious national title aspirations. And Tara's being level with them. She expects this team to go far in the NCAA tournament. That's been the plan all year long. They're happy. They're going to celebrate this regular season title. They're going to go and try and get a title in Las Vegas, but they know the biggest games will come in San Antonio.
Yeah, and when you look at it, they've already started winning some big games. So the first part of that 11-game win streak was kind of some bottom feeders of the Pac-12, or at least some games that you would expect Stanford to win. Importantly, they won them, and I think that goes a long way when you're on a losing streak. I mean, it takes some mental fortitude to just get back to your winning ways. But then they just started to pick up confidence. Then, of course, the road win at number 13 Oregon was huge. I mean, anytime you win at Oregon and sweep Oregon in a season, that's massive, and I think kind of some revenge for the success the Ducks have had over the Cardinal over the past couple seasons. Obviously, they're not the same team without Sabrina, but still very good wins. Then beating Arizona at home last Monday, Arizona ranked number 9, winning that game by 14 points, and that was what clinched you the Pac-12 title. And obviously, just the flood of awards that came in after Stanford just absolutely blitzed Cal by 40 in the regular season finale. This is a team that just sort of quietly got back to work after those 2 losses. We said that we didn't want to be any one of those teams that had to face Stanford coming off of those losses because we knew Tara was going to be able to get the most out of her bunch. But I think that has been incredibly true, and that they continue to play so hard defensively. I mean, are you kidding me? Holding a top 10 team to 48 points, holding Arizona State to 41, and then, I mean, of course, holding Cal to 33 points. They doubled up Cal in both of their matchups this year, by the way. So, there's still a clear hierarchy in the vast majority of sports between the 2 schools separated by the Bay. Shout out to our Cowboys. But it's definitely the kind of thing you want to see from a team that has aspirations of winning Tara's third national championship, and she hasn't won since the early '90s. And if you look at Stanford's resume, that has the number one in the net, only number four in the polls, so people still don't necessarily believe that this team is on the level of UConn, South Carolina, of Texas A&M, of NC State, some of these teams that have been consistently around the top of the rankings. People have doubts about Stanford. That 2-game losing streak is still weighing heavily in the voters' minds, apparently. And yet, I think that this team is playing as well as any of those teams. And this is definitely Tara's best chance, probably in decades, to get that third national championship. And when you look at it, I mean, this is going to be the perfect environment for a Stanford team that spent so much time in Santa Cruz. They're going back to just their usual life of living in a hotel and playing basketball. It's basically like AAU days, and Stanford did that this season. Most teams have had a much more normal season playing in front of fans, playing in their home gym. While Stanford's used to being on the road for extended period of time, they're used to playing in these weird environments, and I think that's going to really help them in the NCAA tournament.
And it'll all come together. We've seen it happen throughout the years, and we've seen it happen this year. I'm going to be looking forward to this Pac-12 tournament because I think it does say a lot. You say they're doubted by a lot of people in the polls. I think in some sense that's fair. They do have 2 losses in Pac-12 play, and because of the pandemic, their out-of-conference schedule is nothing like what it usually is. Usually they'll get a game in against Tennessee. They've gotten some games in against Texas in recent years. Baylor, they gave Baylor their only loss in their national championship year. Normally, Stanford has a lot more tests, but this Pac-12 tournament, this environment, is going to be so important to see how they're going to play heading into March Madness. They're going to have 3 games in 4 days. There's no team that really belongs at Stanford's level, but they should meet a team like UCLA in the championship if everything else goes right. And it's going to be, they have to get there. Not in terms of seeding, they'll probably be a 1 or 2 seed no matter what happens. But it's just so important to mentally have gone through this tournament and have some success because they've already won once. They've already got that regular season title. They've got their freshmen incorporated. They're on an 11-game win streak. Cameron Brink's been in all of them. There's just so much going right now with, how, as you talked about, the defense, how it's really locked in. The 3-point shooting. Kiana Williams has gotten to her game. There's players that could step up, but it's just having that experience. And it's not only the freshmen that are in their first tournament experience, it's also Haley Jones, who was out last year with an injury for the entire second half of the season. She's going to be so important for anything that Stanford does. A former number 1 overall recruit, but someone who can get any shot at any time if she so chooses. It's just how much is she facilitating? How much is she in charge of the offense? There's so much that Stanford is capable of doing. They have that ridiculous depth where their entire starting 5 earn some sort of all-conference nominee honors, as well as a 6th player of the year and a coach of the year. It's a ridiculous amount of riches, but now it's can they put it together in a tournament environment? My vote is on yes, but that's why this upcoming week is so important.
I agree, but at the same time, I think we've seen over time teams' performance in the conference tournament is not necessarily a good predictor of their performance in the NCAA tournament. Yes, you see those teams that go on a run in their conference tournament, and then that carries forward with the momentum into March Madness. But I think at the same time, it is a bit of a separation, and this Stanford team has accomplished what they needed to accomplish. I would be shocked if they weren't a 1 seed unless they fell in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. Even then, I think if you look at the body of work, they probably still should be a number 1 seed. And so, when you look at that, they've done what they needed to do to put themselves in a position to win the NCAA tournament. They also have accumulated momentum. Yes, a loss in the conference tournament might, put some negative thoughts in your head. But overall, I think that this team has done what they wanted to do. And, they've got a little bit of a break in between the Pac-12 and the NCAA. So rest not an issue in that period. So, you want to go all 3 games. But I think if they don't, that's not going to change how I view this team going into March Madness. I think the much bigger concern is going to be, we just don't know how any team from the Pac-12 stacks up with the rest of the country. I think we know that Stanford is excellent. We know they're among the top 10 teams in the country. And I think that they're among the top 2 or 3 teams in the country. But we have not seen this team play any non-conference games. As you mentioned, we haven't seen any teams in other conferences play many non-conference games. And so we're going to figure out a lot in those first weekend of the tournament, and particularly in the Sweet 16 Elite 8 round, when you start playing teams from outside your conference. That's when, I mean, there's going to be a whole lot of prognostication that can get done just based off those first games to see how these teams do against one another. And Kazu in the chat says he would still rather be a Bears fan. Just want to read you a couple things. Kazu, December 13th at Cal, Stanford wins 83-38. And again, on February 28th, last Sunday, Stanford wins at home 72-33 over the Bears. I mean, it's great to be a Bears fan, but I would pick a sport other than women's basketball because that's not going so great right now. And I don't think it's going to go great any time in the foreseeable future compared to Stanford when you look at where this roster is right now. But Daniel, I mean, you look at this Stanford team, do you think that they should be the national championship favorites?
I think they're in the conversation with one or two. They have so much to like. I think there are ways to beat this team, which is why I'm hesitant to say they are the favorite. But when you have a team that can lock down on defense like Stanford can, that gets you to a championship moment. So right now, I would say it's a toss-up, but I expect them to be in that national title game.
Yeah, I expect them to as well. I at very least expect them to make the Final Four, and that would be a great run. I mean, I think we're going to talk about this more with men's basketball, but the adversity that all Stanford sports programs have faced this year is unbelievable. And the basketball's had it about as bad as anybody because of the duration. They were on the road, and their inability to play in Maples for so long, and just the restrictions they had to go under. And they were the only people on campus for long stretches of time, the only team that was still around. And so I think that, that bonds you together, and that's a hardship that can propel you to big things. And at the same time, though, whatever happens to this team, they have so much to be proud of, and their success in the Pac-12 is something that I think Tara will remember forever. And she's had so many Pac-12 championships, but this one is among the most special, as she said, after they clinched it last Monday. Daniel, unfortunately, men's basketball is headed in the opposite direction. 3 consecutive losses, all quad 2 or quad 3. 2 of those losses at home have tumbled the Cardinal out of the bracket. They were probably on the right side of the bubble just a week or so ago, and now all of a sudden they find themselves probably completely out of the bracket. The latest loss at home to Oregon State, their first quad 3 loss of the season, might have just completely ruined Stanford's at-large chances. But do you think that the Cardinals' only shot at March Madness is winning it all in Vegas?
Yeah, I think at this point, that's all that Stanford can really hope for is just putting together some phenomenal games in a tournament setting. We talked about how important it was on the women's side. That was a momentum thing. For the men, it has to be winning a Pac-12 title in Vegas because otherwise there just is no chance. They were on the bubble all year long, and that was before they had these 3 straight losses. If you've watched Stanford recently, they don't look like a tournament team. Granted, some of these losses have come with extenuating circumstances. You're looking at a triple overtime loss, which Stanford really just gave up for the 3rd overtime period. You're looking at 2 losses without Oscar da Silva. But overall, Stanford doesn't look like a tournament team. They have a lot of tournament names. They have someone in Oscar da Silva who has a claim for Pac-12 Player of the Year, but not a tournament squad, not a team that's putting it all together that you're like, I want to see that in March Madness. And at the point when you're picking your 67th, 68th team, that's what you're looking for if you're the committee. You're looking for someone to get people excited to watch. And Stanford just is not that team. They've had some great games. They've had some bad games. And a lot more of their bad games have come recently. If this was a season where Stanford was able to play Alabama and get that win tomorrow, we're talking about something completely different. But as it stands, Stanford has no momentum. Unless they put some magic together in the tournament, I don't see them playing in March Madness.
That certainly seems to be the way things are trending. And it's sad because this is a Stanford team with a whole lot of talent. You have maybe the Pac-12's best player, probably its 2nd best player in Oscar da Silva. You have Zaire Williams, who's going to be a lottery pick. You have a number of other players who are capable of putting up big numbers in any given night, who I think will lead a strong core next season. And I think also got to give a shout out to Dejan Davis, who is a senior, and so likely done, and not necessarily getting those accolades. Has missed a lot of time. Didn't play in the second half of the Oregon State game. Has had some personal issues as well. But he's a guy that that has also never made the tournament in his career, but has been a major part of Stanford basketball as a 1,000-point scorer, among the top 15 in assists, I believe, and top 10 in steals, and also hit that buzzer beater in his freshman season against USC. That is among those moments that people will always remember. But that being said, you're exactly right. This is a team that's not playing like a tournament team at this point, and it's really sad to say because we've been following them all season. We know that at this team's peak, it's better than most bubble teams. When you look at other teams on the bubble, like Boise State, Wichita State, Stanford could beat them if they play well. The problem is it's about your resume, and when you're 14-11 and you've lost 3 straight games headed into March, that's just not the kind of resume that the committee is going to reward. That being said, I do think that there is a chance for Stanford to get an at-large bid if they reach the Pac-12 final, because to do that, that would first involve beating USC tomorrow night. So cross your fingers for that one. That's any at-large chances that Stanford has left roll through LA tomorrow night. That absolutely must be. That's a must-win game for Stanford. And moreover, when you look at Oregon State now, just a half game behind Stanford in the standings, Oregon State has to play a couple more games remaining, but they could get up and steal that number 5 seed, and the top 5 seeds in the Pac-12 tournament will get a bye this season because of Arizona's absence from the tournament, self-imposed postseason ban. And so even though Stanford is 6th in the Pac-12 standings, that effectively puts them at 5th, but Oregon State is charging at their heels. And I think that it would be disastrous for Stanford if they're not able to get one of those byes, because the bye means you only have to win 3 games. And winning 3 games in 3 days is a whole lot easier than winning 4 games in 4, for fatigue, for probability's sake, for everything else, even if that first game is a quote-unquote easy matchup. But yeah, so you win against USC, then your likely first-round Pac-12 tournament opponent is Colorado. That's also a quad 1 game. And then all of a sudden you have 2 quad 1 wins, and that would put Stanford at 6, which is a very high number for a bubble team. Headed into the weekend when they had 4, that was the highest number in the Pac-12. And then you'd have a chance against likely number 1 seed UCLA or Oregon or USC. It's unclear who that number 1 seed is going to be. So you could stack together 3 quick Pac-12 or quad 1 wins, 3 quad 1 Pac-12 wins. And I think that then Stanford's resume would look pretty darn strong and would probably be enough. But the Oregon State loss was just massive, because I think that winning at Oregon State alone keeps you on the bubble for now. If you win against Oregon State, if you avoid that quad 3 loss, then you still have the very strong point of your resume that you don't have that quad 3 or quad 4 defeat. Instead, you take your first truly bad loss of the season, and now you don't have any margin for error. And I think that if there was, if you had won that Oregon State game, I think there would have been a chance to get in merely by beating USC tomorrow night and then winning in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. So I think it cost Stanford a whole win of even having a chance at the tournament. And so it's a very dire position, and it's hard to see this Stanford team going on the type of run they would need to reach March Madness.
Yeah, that's the question I wanted to ask you, King, because you're putting forward a path where they win 3 games, essentially. They beat USC, they win the first 2 tournament games. Right now, that seems incredibly unlikely. I just don't see how they're able to put that together based on what we've seen recently. I mentioned a few minutes ago, I don't think they look like a tournament team. They don't look like a top team in the Pac-12 right now, which just they don't. They have some players, they have some guys, they have some great moments where you're like, wow, this team can put things together. They have a really strong defense. They're moving the ball in offense. But now we're looking at a team where, there's some cracks. There's some holes. The turnovers are really starting to be a problem. Oscar da Silva's in foul trouble. I don't see how they're able to get that far with the team they have right now. It just seems like every game enough goes wrong. And I think we have to start talking about the fact that Stanford men's basketball seems to be fading at the end of the year every single year. For the past 3 years at least, Stanford has been fading at the end of the year. Last year, we think they probably maybe would have made the tournament, but it was a stretch at that point because they struggled so much and lost in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. And I think that needs to be a conversation we have, because at the end of games and at the end of seasons, Stanford is struggling. That needs to be raised a little bit more.
Yeah, that is the thing, that if there is a blemish on Coach Jared Haas's resume, and I love Coach Haas, it's that his teams are not performing when they most need to. And I think if you look at last year, I believe there, with the loss to Cal in the Pac-12 tournament, I believe that meant 3 straight losses to end the season for that Stanford squad as well, including a loss at Oregon State and then the loss to Cal, and then sandwiched in between the two, an expected road loss at Oregon. And before that Oregon State game, Stanford again solidly on the bubble, but then 3 straight losses. I think that if the Pac-12 tournament had played out, I honestly don't think that Stanford would have been in the tournament. I think that they would have been relying on a seemingly hyperinflated net ranking that did not seem to correspond with how good this team actually was. And again, this team, kind of the opposite. I don't think their net ranking valued as good as they were for most of the season. But then they kind of proved the efficacy of the net and Kim Pom and these other rankings that have had them lower all season, because when they most needed to, they haven't been able to perform. And I think when you look at Coach Haas again signing a near top 10 class, another McDonald's All-American, another 5-star in Harrison Ingram, Issa Silva is going to be a big time player as well. I think that there's every reason in the world to give him another year. I absolutely would give him another season and maybe 2 more. But I think next year is probably going to be NCAA tournament or bust. I think that Jared Haas is building something very strong with the Stanford program, but at some point you have to put up or shut up. And I think we're getting to that point that, again, Stanford's had a good roster. I think they've had a definitely a tournament roster the last 2 seasons. I think when you go back to 3 years ago, my freshman season, when you had Reed Travis leading the way and Mike Humphreys and Dorian Pickens, and then them joined by Dejan and KZ in that strong freshman class, that was a team that probably should have been in the tournament, but they started slowly and weren't able to get things under control. And listen, there's so many excuses for this year's team. And I think that we don't want to discount the fact that they were spent 59 out of 64 days on the road, and they've had a ridiculous number of games missed by their key contributors, particularly Dejan Davis, who, coming in the season, probably expected to be your 3rd best player, and simply has just not been available, has been available for, I believe, less than half of your games. And so that's going to hurt you. I think Zaire Williams not quite being what you expect from a top 10 freshman is going to hurt you. And you got everything and more from Oscar da Silva, but as we saw in his absence this weekend, there's not that much behind him. And so I think that there's a lot of questions for this team going into the offseason, and I'm just hoping they finish on a really strong note, because I don't want to be entertaining questions about job security next year or entertaining questions about the future of this program. I think Coach Haas has done a fantastic job getting Stanford to where it is, back to a relevant basketball powerhouse, not a powerhouse, a relevant basketball program, particularly in the Pac-12. But at some point, you got to reach NCAAs at a school like Stanford. This is year 5. Doesn't look like it's going to happen unless something miraculous occurs down the stretch of this season. Like we said, 3 straight wins is what it's going to take. Maybe 4 straight wins and a Pac-12 title.
And it's unfortunate because I just want to say everything that Haas has done earns him credit. Everything he's done has given you a reason to like him. But at a certain point, Stanford needs to produce.
Yeah, he's a very likable guy too, and that's clearly a big part of why he's such a good recruiter. Seems genuine. Players love him. And like you see, like a lot of times out of timeouts, they draw up really good plays. So it's not like he's not an X's and O's coach. But this team looks lost offensively for long stretches. And it seems like that the system is just not taking root. And I think that the amount of time that players have missed has a lot to do with that. At the same time, you still have to be able to have a competent offense no matter who's in the game, at least generating good shots. Some games Stanford's just missing good shots. More often, they're turning it over and not getting shots up at all, or just looking lost and ending up with a lot of one-on-one basketball. And frankly, they don't have enough players who are capable of going one-on-one. I do think Jaden Delaire, by the way, is a name to watch out for. If Stanford is going to go on a run, that's going to be a guy who's going to be a big part of it, and is going to be a huge factor for this team next year. Daniel, we like to highlight everything, all the great things happening on the farm. I think women's basketball is the highlight right now when you look at them coming into March Madness with so much momentum. But there's a whole lot of other stuff happening on the farm as well. Stanford athletics program, we know it. It's the best in the country. It's not even close. And the Directors Cup streak, and it tells that enough. But I would say even more impressive is that in 44 consecutive school years, Stanford has won at least one national championship. I mean, that's just ridiculous. None occurred in 2020 because in 2020, the winter sports were cut off before their championships, and the only fall sport to really compete for all the way to the end of its season was football, and Stanford obviously did not win the football championship. And so the year 2020, there were no national championships, but we expect that something's going to happen in 2021 to stretch this streak to a remarkable record-breaking 45 years with a national championship. But Daniel, who do you think are some of the top contenders? And maybe who do you think can get this thing first?
Yeah, I appreciate the way you phrase this question. It's not will any team make it to 45, it's which. The fact that Stanford has made it to 44 years is absolutely crazy. The athletic department is just ridiculous. But this year is going to be a stretch. It's going to be a struggle. There's so much happening. Everything has moved to the spring, and it's not like 2019, the most recent one, when it was men's water polo, women's soccer, women's volleyball, all in the span of like 2 weeks winning national championships. Like, okay, it doesn't matter if there's no spring season. Like, Stanford's going to keep their record going. Not like the year before when Stanford was breaking records and had like 6 national championships. This one is going to be a stretch, but I do think there are some teams that are going to compete for national championships. We've talked a lot about women's basketball. We both said we expected them to be in the Final Four, maybe even in the national championship game. That's someone to look out for. That's just an extremely talented team. I think I'm also looking at men's soccer just because of the history under Jeremy Gunn. They seem to have a really strong team every single year. They've put out a really good roster this year, have a ridiculous amount of talent, and they always seem to put it together in tournament time. They play some of the ugliest soccer you will find in the NCAA, but it is just so effective. They'll grind you down with their defense. They have counterattacks. It's tailor-made for a tournament, and it just seems to work year after year. They didn't have an exceptionally talented roster last year, and they were in the College Cup in North Carolina. So this is a team that is always going to put it together, is always going to be in the mix. But after that, we look at women's soccer, women's volleyball, the last two to win it, and now we're starting to see teams that are having down years. So it's going to be a little bit tougher after that, but if you look at a team like women's tennis, who's had a great history throughout Stanford, you look at some of the golf teams, now you're starting to see some programs that have other shots at winning national championships.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned women's soccer, women's volleyball, who I would say are two of the most successful programs on Stanford's campus. Maybe if you put them up against women's tennis, it's probably those three that at least in recent years have been the most successful and dominant in all of the college landscape, at least on the farm, or amongst teams on the farm. And two of those teams, I mean, when you look at women's volleyball and women's soccer, both of them had a huge amount of roster turnover. I expect that both of them are going to improve to the point where they're in the tournament and playing well enough to maybe go on a run once they're there. But nevertheless, I don't think you can consider them national championship contenders at this point, which is shocking to see considering how dominant they've been recently. But I think men's soccer is again right there. Women's golf, it's a top 10 team, just set a school record for, I believe, their lowest score under par in their most recent tournament. So they've got a lot of promise as maybe that team who can go ahead and push it to 45. Of course, I think the golf season will extend longer than some of these other seasons. And so that one might have to wait if that's what Stanford is relying on. Of course, we know that swimming and diving is always going to be a really strong point, particularly women's swimming. So that is certainly a one to look out for. Women's tennis, we just looked at the rankings. They were not in the rankings, so we're figuring out what's going on there. But they, I mean, have won half the national championships that have ever happened in their sport, and so hard to argue that they won't be part of the mix once their tournament arrives. As we know, Stanford cut 11 sports, and some of those sports are getting to play out their last season this year. I'm including wrestling, who just finished third in the Pac-12 championship. Don't know if they're a national championship contender, but certainly have had a strong season in what is likely their last season. A few of these teams, like lightweight rowing, are traditionally the best in their sport, or among the best teams in all of their respective sports. And so it is a shame to see that there's fewer teams that can go out there and win a national championship, particularly since some of those teams aren't going to be competing this year either. The Stanford's athletic department is going through some major changes. What we do expect to happen is that we're going to get to 45 consecutive years with a national championship. Don't know who it's going to be. I'm hoping it's women's basketball because that would be a absolutely fantastic way to wrap up what has been a difficult season for them, but I think a season that they will never forget and that has to go down as one of Tara's best coaching jobs. And that's saying something. So that's all for us this week at Cardinal Dash. Go out and follow us on social media to see all our latest content. Again, go back and check out our episode with Katie Meyer last week. That was awesome. We had a great time talking with her, and thank her again for coming on the show. And thank you for listening. We appreciate all of the support, and we'll be back here next week. So thank you for listening, and go Card.